Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Last of Us Season 2, Episode 7. It's called Convergence and it is the season finale, so spoilers for the episode as always. This takes us halfway through the second game and there's been kind of a worry from, I think, a lot of people, but I certainly had the concern that how satisfying the end of this season would feel, basically because it's just half the story. And yeah, it kind of feels like I expected it to. It kind of feels like this was the end of part 1 of season 2, and we're going to be waiting on part 2 of season 2. Well, I mean, they're going to call it season 3. I'll have to call it season 3 because that's what they're calling it, but it doesn't really feel at the end of a season in a lot of ways. And sadly, I am a little bit lukewarm on this episode. I think that some of the critiques that I had a couple of episodes ago, the flashback episode was kind of immune to this because it was so focused and it was its own separate thing. But this episode and episode 5 both feel like they rushed through a lot of things, and it made some of the progression to get to the big moments. And the big moments themselves are really good. Like when Ellie finally got to Nora at the end of episode 5, that was a great sequence. And I praised it and I thought it was fantastic. I think when she gets to the aquarium in this episode, the scene and how it plays out is solid. I don't think it's as good as the Nora scene, but it is pretty good. The problem, though, is that a lot of the things on the way there's a lot less enemy resistance. What resistance she does face is actually something new they've added that felt a bit weird. I get why they did it. You know, they did this whole moment where she runs into the scars and almost get hanged. That moment felt a bit weird to me. Now I get why they did it, because it feels like they're trying to give you like something to connect the timeline to the story we're going to get next season, right? Because the end of the episode reveals, for those of you who didn't know, that the next half of the story, a lot of it is going to be following the same 3 days, but from Abby's perspective, and we're going to see what she was up to. So this moment of like teasing, oh, something's happening in the Scars village over there, is a way of saying, hey, there's going to be something next season where we see what the other side of that is. And there's actually a really cool tease during the episode that's very just in the background of the Sky Bridge. It's a really cool location where it's like basically cranes that are going across the top of some skyscrapers, and you can see it in the background in one of the shots when Ellie and Jesse are walking around in this episode. I did get excited with that tease because it's a really cool, unique location, and I'm excited to see how they pull that off next season, because they have to do that segment. They have to. But a lot of the things here did feel very rushed. Like I like, you know, we only just got Jesse showing up, and the way that we just go to, you know, like them being together, like I think the progression from like when they leave together to when they split up, and Ellie makes the choice to go and try and find Abby because she realizes that the one thing that Nora said about a wheel, and then the whale, I think it was, she realizes, oh, she's talking about the aquarium because there's a Ferris wheel there, and she wants to go there. But that journey there, right, because she says she has to get a boat, right? And there's a whole segment in the game where you're on a boat and you're going through kind of the flooded like streets of Seattle, and you have to take on a lot of enemies, and then you do the journey up to the aquarium itself, and it oddly felt like by taking out all of the enemies and having her just kind of get there quite easily, it made the whole wave sequence where she gets knocked out of the boat feel, I don't know, almost like obviously that's a big deal and it's very difficult and it's a very challenging moment for to go through, but it felt like we just went from 0 to 10 in like terms of like obstacles, whereas in the game it kind of naturally ramps up to that point, and it feels like after all you've been through, oh, now this is going to get in the way, and it feels like a big deal. So by the time you actually get to the aquarium, it feels like you've went through a war to get there. So much like I complained about Joel in the season 1 finale with the hospital, and I complained with her getting into the hospital too easily in episode 5, I feel kind of similar about the journey to the aquarium. It just feels like we were kind of on fast forward and doing cliff notes as opposed to actually doing, you know, building the feelings that I expected to feel from some of these sequences. And I do wonder how people who have not played the game like feel about the pacing and feel about the way Tommy just kind of shows up with Jesse and stuff like that. Not that like that's that different necessarily from the game, but just it feels like there's so much time in the game between the encounters with Jesse and then when Jesse's with Tommy and all that stuff, that it feels like you've been kind of like waiting for a long time, and there's been enough time for a lot of stuff to happen Whereas here it feels like we said goodbye to Jesse, and then within like 6 minutes he's back with Tommy, and it doesn't feel like there's enough time passing from a pacing perspective to make it feel like a big deal. It almost feels like we've been talking about Tommy being around for a couple of episodes, and he just kind of shows up, and he's here now. Obviously, there's a tease of the sniper thing, which again, we're going to see the other side of that later. There's a lot of stuff in this episode that's very obvious. We're going to see the other side of some of this stuff next season, and I think that's very clear. I don't think that's a spoiler to say that, because it's the way it's telegraphed really feels that way. So we have that kind of issue, which I think is one thing. I think the whole scars bit feels a bit weird to me, because while I like the idea of giving you kind of an anchor to say, oh, this is where it ties in timeline-wise with the other side of the story, because we're going to understand what that alarm was and why they're all scared and running away. But it also kind of felt like Ellie had too much plot armor in the moment, because realistically, I feel like they would just quickly kill her if they had to like go run back to camp kind of thing. Instead, they say, no, just leave her and run. And it felt like it would be so quick just to like slit her throat, right? As dark as that sounds, it feels like, why wouldn't they just do that? It doesn't make much sense, especially since they don't seem to believe her or care that she's not a wolf. Whatever whether or not they think she's a wolf or they know she's not and they don't care. Regardless, it felt like they had no qualms about just killing her. So it feels really weird that she was just left alive by them, and the whole thing felt a little bit forced to me. Once she gets to the aquarium, the actual way that plays out, the sneak into the room, the standoff with Owen, and the other character, Mel's the name of the other character. I think that's handled well enough. The moment of the gunshot is quite good. In particular, the moment of realization that the bullets also went through the neck or across the side of the neck of Mel, and Ellie then being kind of horrified that she realizes that Mel is pregnant, and obviously Dina's pregnant, so there's someone directly to relate to in this episode. And obviously a lot of the conversation between Jesse and Ellie this episode are largely centered around what makes you good, right? And what makes you not a monster. And they have a conflict about him always doing what's best for community, and that she's all selfish and does what she wants for herself. But there's also a sequence where they see a young Scar be attacked and dragged away by some wolves, and Ellie wants to intervene. She thinks this is awful. She wants to do something about it. And Jesse says, this is stupid. There's 6 of them, 2 of us. I'm not dying here. Spoiler, he does die here. They actually maybe hit that a little too hard as well. He says twice in the episode before the end of the where he does get shot very quickly in the head by Aby. He does say a couple times this episode that he can't die here. It's too important, because he's realized he's going to be a father. He's like, no, I can't die now. No, you can die. You're going to die hard. Don't you worry about that. So, yeah, I think the moral debate is a little more interesting. I do think they spell it out a little bit too much, to be fair, but there is some interesting pros and cons to it. Jesse admitting that, Ellie, while her methods are chaotic to say the least, this realization that, he helped Tommy come and get her because he knows that Ellie would literally burn down the entire city to come help him, because that's Ellie's MO, is that she's determined to do this for Joel, and that would translate to anyone else she cares about. I do think it makes Ellie and Jesse's relationship a little bit more intricate than it perhaps was in the games. I think overall I do like the game much more, right? I think that's pretty clear in my feelings by this point. I think a lot of the quiet moments when the characters are just been able to communicate as they're walking around, I think how it handles certain moments and the pacing, I think, is much better. But there are some things in the show that are better this season, and one of them is I do think I like this show's version of Dina a bit more, and I think that relationship feels a little bit more touching in the show than it does in the game. And I think maybe this relationship between Ellie and Jesse, and even Dina and Joel, had a bit more of a relationship. So there's definitely some benefits and some positives to things that we've done or added to or changed from the game. But the things that are still here from the game, a lot of it feels like we're kind of rushing through cliff notes at a certain point. And I think I really felt that in the back half of this season. And that feeling's only made worse by the fact that it's only 7 episodes, and it feels like, couldn't we have had 10? Couldn't we have fleshed this out a little bit more and had some better pacing going through some of this stuff and really sold the threat of a bunch of this? It's also kind of interesting to me that it's been, several episodes now since we've really had any threat from clickers or infected of any kind. Like, they've kind of become an afterthought at this point, which isn't necessarily the end of the world, don't get me wrong. Like, the human threat and the war that's going on between the wolves and the scars is maybe more the focus this season, and that's okay. And it does feel like that's building to some big conflict, which they tease. They tease it in the scene with Isaac talking to the other lady who lost her son in that flashback a couple episodes ago. And they're talking about how Abby's supposed to be the new leader once he's gone, and he's pissed off that she's disappeared, which is just further, again, teasing that there's something going on with Aby, that Aby and Owen and her whole team have been kind of like off the grid for a couple of days, and you realise that couple of days is this period of time that Ellie's been in Seattle. So it's hinting that there's story to be told there, and clearly the end of this episode is telling the non-game playing audience that is what we're doing. We get the Seattle day one thing again at the end. But it's funny because each day in the game feels like an epic journey, and in this episode we get Seattle day 3, a few minutes into the episode, and then it feels like barely any time goes by and we're already getting Seattle day 1 from Abby's perspective at the end, which is an interesting moment to end it on. I think I kind of get it. I understand that you're telling the audience that don't know the game that this is what we're doing next season. We're at the very least going to start with her side of the perspective, and we're going to see what she was up to. I do wonder, though, because this season, all of Ellie's days in Seattle were 1 episode each. Now, obviously, we took a break for a flashback episode, but they were all 1 day each, or 1 episode each, I should say. I cannot foresee that that's the same for Aby, based on what I remember from her side of the story. And I also think that it would be very weird if, like, I suppose there's enough after the 3 days to do another, 3 episodes, now that I'm thinking about it, but I do wonder if they extend it. But to be honest, if I have one worry about next season now, it is maybe that they're going to rush through a lot of that stuff a little bit too quickly. And I do think, one of the reasons why the transition to Abby's side of the story works so well in the game is because you're immediately going to do it, right? You transition from that moment, that cliffhanger, and you start off Abby's side of the story, and you just keep going, and you're so curious about what's happening. You also feel conflicted that you're playing as Aby, who's been kind of the villain, for the boogeyman that's been mostly off camera most of the story, and you're going to follow her side of things. I think the reason why a lot of us expected them to change the structure for the show is for exactly the problem that we might be in now, which is this idea that we're now expected to wait, 2 years before we continue Abby's side of the story? And how is that going to feel coming back when we don't get to see Ellie and the other characters for at least 3 or 4 episodes, probably, when we come back for season 3? That's a little bit strange. It worked when it was all one thing, and I do think in the long run, I get why they wanted multiple seasons out of it, but that was, I got them splitting it when I thought it was going to be 2 10-episode seasons, and that made some sense to me. 20 episodes felt about right in my head, and I can understand that 10's all they want to do in a full season. But as soon as they said this season was only 7 episodes, which makes me think that next season will be at most 7 episodes, it might even be less. I could see it being like 5 or 6 episodes, which would suck. I think my opinion of no, this should have just been one big 13, 14 episode season, as much as I think it should have had some more episodes, if this was all this part of the story was going to be with 7 episodes, it should have been done in one chunk. It should have been done in one bigger chunk, especially with how long it takes to make goddamn seasons of TV now. It's a big complaint I've had for the last few years, is that TV seasons take longer to make now, so you're waiting years for another season, and they're like a fraction of the length of what they used to be. Now, the quality of production value and effects and stuff like that is a lot higher than it used to be. That is fair. And maybe you need it in some shows. Maybe you need it in this one because of all the post-apocalyptic stuff and the shots of the city and all that. But a lot of shows don't need it. And yeah, it doesn't matter. We're in this format now. This is the world we live in. We have to deal with these big gaps, and we have to deal with, this is how they make TV shows now. And it kind of sucks. Maybe that's maybe that's something that younger people who are under 25, because they've just grown up with TV being more like this, they don't really care, and they don't really like understand the desire for 22 episode seasons of a TV show, but I do kind of miss it for certain types of shows. It's not right for all shows. Some shows are better for, 10 episodes or less. Some shows actually fit the network long format. And we're very good at doing that. I don't think Last of Us should be one of those shows, for the record. I don't think it is, but it's just, it gets me thinking about it when I think about the weight that we now have to endure before we get the rest of this. And sadly, because I was kind of lukewarm in this episode, and I felt like it kind of rushed through a few things, and it left me feeling like I didn't really get the emotional impact that I was kind of wanting to feel from a lot of the big things that happened. When we get to the end of this episode, and they've taken Ellie back to the theater, and like Tommy's trying to say, hey, they were part of her team, they made her choice, don't feel guilty, can you live with letting Abby go? And she's like, I guess I'll have to. When it gets to this stuff, and I knew it was about to happen, I knew they were going to do the big shock thing of like Abby showing up, wanting revenge, now pissed that most of her friends are dead. Like, I wanted to feel more for this sequence, and I was finding myself struggling to do so because I felt like we rushed to it so quick. I don't know. It's a tough one to deal with. I think the nature of transitioning this to a TV show was always going to be difficult, more than even season 1 or the first game was, just because it has such a unique structure in of itself. And I do think the idea of Abby being off camera after the initial, like, what she does to Joel for so long to turn her into this boogeyman that Ellie keeps like talking about. The only mention of Abby for so much of the story is Ellie saying, we need to get Abby. Let's find Abby. Where the hell is Abby? She becomes this boogeyman, just this idea of the thing she needs to hunt. And I think that works in the game quite well because you're kind of like, it's your goal that you're constantly moving towards. But in the TV show, a few things kind of dilute it a little bit. One is the rush feeling, so it doesn't feel like it's been as long. 2, I think Ellie's characterization in the show hasn't been as like, like dead set on her anger and vengeance the entire time. I think I was talking a lot about in the middle of the season that she felt like she was having this kind of fun romantic adventure with Dina, and it wasn't really until Nora where that kind of side of Ellie really came out and felt like that anger, that violence was coming out. And I don't mind that necessarily in and of itself, but I do think it's maybe having a knock-on effect and how I feel about the showdowns that are happening here at the end of the season. It does feel like we've kind of rushed to these moments, and I think the impact, compared to the impact I felt when I got halfway through the game and I hit these moments where I was riveted by what was happening, I was on the edge of my seat. I was concerned about who was living and dying, and the forcing me to go play Abby's side of the story at this point was such, I mean, some people didn't like it, but I thought it was kind of a genius move because it was making me feel uncomfortable. And the whole point of it is to start to question the other viewpoint and see the other side of the anger and see, let's see if we can make Abby more relatable. Can we care about what she cares about? Is she a good person inherently? It just happens to be up against Ellie because of what Joel did. And that set them on these two sides of this path and that kind of thing. And I here, I don't know if it's quite earned that same moment for me going into the end of this episode, which is a shame. I think the first half of the episode as well just felt a little, I don't know, unexciting. Like, I think the early conversations with Ellie and Dina, even though there's some good acting, obviously Ellie tearing up as she's telling Dina about what Joel did, and getting Dina's reaction and not being sure how to take that. It's a good scene from a performance perspective. It really is. But I guess, we're so pumped up from the stuff in episode 5, and we had to pause a whole episode for the flashbacks. Now, the flashbacks were great. That was a great episode. But coming back to this, you kind of wanted to pick up that momentum again, I think, a little bit. Abrupt cut because I started coughing my lungs out. I have returned. But yeah, it feels like we go through a lot of this early part of the episode with these various conversations between the characters. And I have to admit, I don't know if I necessarily enjoyed the untangling of the love triangle, if you want to call it that. Like when they're in the bookstore and Jesse and Ellie are talking about, romance, and he's like, I know how you two look at each other, and he talks about how he fell in love with this girl who was in a traveling group going through Jackson at one point, and he wanted to leave and go with her, but chose not to because he wanted to, the community depends on him, and he felt like he owed it to Jackson because they took him in and raised him and so on. I think, like, I appreciate what it's doing with that, but I think part of it is because I know where this episode is going to end because I've played the game. It was actually a little bit frustrating, and knowing how short the episode was, because again, we were kind of just under 50 minutes, I was kind of feeling like, really, that like we're doing this. This feels like we shouldn't be having this conversation in the finale. It felt like the finale should feel a bit more climactic throughout. It should feel like we're on this rush up to this big final thing. And I feel like Ellie fighting her way through to get to the aquarium, and all the big showdowns that happen there, the tragedy of that, and obviously the ending with Aby. It felt like there should have been more, I guess, action building up to that made it feel like a gauntlet again. I use that word a lot because that's something I feel a lot when I'm playing these games. And I know you can't have that constantly, and you shouldn't have it constantly. But there's specific moments where I feel like it is missing in the show, and I think this episode has that problem. I think it's probably my least favorite episode of the season. Well, maybe not actually. Maybe episode 3 is the one with the town meeting and all that, because that was a little underwhelming as well. Yeah, the highs in this episode are higher than that one, so that's probably the worst one. But this is pretty close to that one for me, which is a shame. I don't want to leave off the season feeling lukewarm and feeling a little bit diminished, because that kind of happened with season 1, where the finale was my least favorite episode of the season, and it made me forget that I enjoyed it enough that I should be excited for season 2. So I ended up not being that excited, and then I kind of remembered when I started watching it, oh yeah, this show's usually really good. It just had kind of a weaker finale. And it's kind of done it to me again in a weird way. And obviously there's a lot of fresh things to look forward to in season 3, and I know a lot of big moments from the game that I'm excited to see how they capture on screen. But it does feel sometimes like they're just doing the cliff notes of what happened and kind of glossing over some of the stuff that makes it feel kind of special. And maybe over explaining some things here or there as well, which is a bit of a shame. So I hate to feel a little bit down on it. I do, because I think I will say this. I do know that I'm kind of sick with online discourse when it comes to The Last of Us. I feel a lot about talking about Last of Us on the internet. Now, obviously, I can make my reviews because I'm just talking to myself, and I can just say what I want to say, and that's it, and I can be done with it. But hearing other people talk about Last of Us on the internet is a lot like listening to people talk about Star Wars on the internet for me at this point, where I just don't really want to hear it. I don't really want to take any of it in, because there's a lot of really weird, hostile opinions about Last of Us. A lot of people feel really passionate about hating it, love to hate it. And it's just at a point where I'm not even mad or anything. I just don't want to listen to it. It's just going to dampen my mood, so I just stay away from it. And I feel kind of the same about Star Wars, not because I love Star Wars. I actually don't like Star Wars that much. I like the original trilogy, but all the heated and weird, passionate fan base stuff and the hatred that gets thrown around is just something that I want to avoid. And I feel like for the most part with Last of Us, I kind of don't want to pay attention to what most people are saying about it. So, which is just to say that consider this like a vacuum in which I can just give my feelings on things and move on, because I do love the games. I think the games are 2 of the most special games ever made. One's in my top 10 for sure, and it's interesting seeing how they've adapted it to a TV show. But I do think season 1 felt like it was doing some really cool, interesting things as an adaptation, and so is season 2 as well. But I think season 2 by the end now kind of feels like it's a weird entity to me, where it's pretty solid and good and has some great moments where I really love things that I've taken from the game, but it's always going to be overall the inferior version of it to me. At least unless season 3 does something kind of wild to kind of bring it all back. But it feels like going forward, because you hear this sometimes about other things like books that have been adapted, and people who obviously recognize that, say, Lord of the Rings is obviously this big trilogy, but they don't necessarily like the interpretation of it based on what they read in the book. And I'm not feeling that strongly here about the Last of Us TV show. I generally think it's pretty damn good, and sometimes excellent. But there's just enough things now, maybe in season 2, where I feel like, yeah, this is kind of an interesting addition to the game to see how they handle it here. But I don't know if it's quite standing on its own in a way that season 1 mostly did, until maybe that last episode that was a little bit more middling for me. So anyway, I know I don't even know what to add at this point. I kind of came away. This is a really awkward one to talk about for me, just because I kind of came away from it without a lot of specific things that I wanted to say. Because normally I come out and I've got like, oh, this scene's got this stuff that I want to talk about. This scene's got this stuff that I want to talk about. Whereas all I really felt at the end of this was an overall feeling. I felt like an overall feeling about the whole episode, and my feelings like leaving now for 2 years before season 3 hits. That was my main sense of feelings here, rather than specific things that I wanted to discuss bit by bit or one by one, which makes it a little bit of a more of a weirdly rambling talk or whatever that I'm doing right now. I'm being incoherent, I'm sure, but that's my feelings on the Last of Us season 2 finale. There's a lot to like here, there absolutely is, but this was definitely, I think, a middling finale for me, and the cliffhanger, you know, it was always going to feel weird, that being the end of the season, and I don't think they maybe should have changed it more to work more as a cliffhanger for the middle or the end of the season, and it does feel strange now. So yeah, we begin the wait. We begin the wait for season 3, where we'll get more of everything else. I guess the hope is that they're further ahead, and maybe they shot season 3 like back to back, or maybe they're going to be shooting it a lot quicker because, you know, they have all this cast doing the other side of the story and they need to get to it quicker. I don't know, but let me know what you thought of the season and the finale in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff helps out a bunch, and of course you can support all the content at Patreon, patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, or via YouTube membership. That's more your thing. Any support from any direction is greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for joining me. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?